Before we share in this conversation, however, we have a scripture that we're hoping to kind of set the stage for this sacred conversation on the occasion of Access Sunday. And so here are these words that come from the Gospel of Mark. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right and one at your left, in glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized, but to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be servant of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is the word of God for the people of God. God is still speaking. Thanks be to God. As I said, to help me set the stage for this in unpacking this text a little bit, I want to ask the youth group something. So you guys, when you're hopping in a car with somebody, your friends, your family, whoever, you call shotgun? You ever call shotgun? Help me out. Explain to me what that is. What does it mean when you call shotgun? Dibs, right. Passenger seat. You want to get in the front seat next to the driver. Okay, now, let me go a little further with this. Are there rules to shotgun when you do it? Yeah, there's different rules, and I'll bet they're all going to be a little bit different, right? So when I was 15, I had a summer birthday. My friends all had birthdays before me, and they were all getting their driver's license and stuff. And so whenever somebody got a driver's license, we would all want to run out and get in the front seat of the car. And so we would all call shotgun. And so we had to have rules. Some of the rules were like, you can't call shotgun until you're walking out of the building, right? Is that one that you maybe have? One of the other rules was you can't call shotgun until you're, within 25 yards of the car, something weird like that. Any of y'all have that one? Yeah, no? Maybe it's just me. All right. Good talk. I'm asking him about this because that's what's happening in the story. Okay, so James and John, the sons of Zebedee, one of these biblical commentators called them the sons of entitlement. And when Jesus is doing all these amazing things and his ministry is really taking off and it looks like it's just going to really gain some traction, it's going to be powerful, that's when they say, dibs, like Nick said, dibs. And so they come up and say, we want to see it on either side of you in glory. And I have to give props to the guys at the Pulpit Fiction podcast on this one. They pointed out that is basically them saying, shotgun! But then Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Jesus is about to drive the car off the cliff. Would you call shotgun if Jesus was going to go, all right, here we go, and then pop the emergency brake and flip it over? That's what's happening. They think that they're going to be getting into this big, powerful situation, and Jesus is saying, no, you don't know what you're asking. I'm pointing this out because Jesus is saying we need a conversion experience. We often think that when it comes to our religion, a conversion experience means that we convert people to Christianity. But no, Jesus is trying to convert our thinking, trying to convert our attitude, get us to look at things, get us to look at each other in ways that we didn't before. And so he's trying to get them to understand, to get us to understand, that to be powerful doesn't mean that you get in this position of authority where you lord it over people or you're a tyrant. But to be powerful means that you're a servant. You want to call shotgun? To be up front means that you're a servant of all, that you love your neighbor and that you serve them because you see them as your neighbor. So on this Access Sunday, this word in the Scripture resonates deeply from the sons of entitlement when they say, we are able. And we need to look at that in a different way. You notice on the sign out front, it says, accessibility for all requires a change in our attitude, a conversion of thinking. So, just to give you an example of what I mean. Civil rights movement, that was a big change in our thinking. But perhaps only momentarily, because out of it good things happened. Yes, we had civil rights legislation. But no more end to segregation legally didn't necessarily change our thinking. Decades later, we still have a lot of work to do, don't we? There are racist systems. There is rampant racism in our country. And all of it has to do with our attitude. You can legislate all day, and that is a good thing. But until we change how it is that we see each other, that legislation and regulation can only go so far. So likewise, we need to be mindful of the fact that this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think we have, could you put this screen up for us? So the U.S. Department of Labor describes the Americans with Disabilities Act, says it prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in employment, transportation, public accommodation, communications, and governmental activities. And this is just a fraction of what it is supposed to do. 25th anniversary of this. Wow, we have come so far. Yes, but primarily in accommodating our neighbors with disabilities rather than fully including our neighbors with disabilities. Seeing them as Jesus calls us as servants to one another, to see one another. Whether it's civil rights legislation or the ADA, all of it is an us and them thing. But as followers of Christ, if we're going to call shotgun on this and be proud of what it is that we're doing, then we need to be able to take the us and them and turn it in to we. We need an attitude change. And to do that, we need things like this. A simple conversation as a congregation where we talk about this. And so that's what we want to do today. And so I'm honored to have Robin and David with me here. And before I ask you guys a couple of questions, I was hoping that you could introduce yourselves to the congregation. Just let us know why it is that you're up here.
Okay. I'm Robin Miller, and I worked in senior services for the first half of my adulthood, and then I moved into special education. So I've worked with some form of disability for all of my career. But the real reason that I'm here is just that I'm a member of, I always get our name wrong, so I'm actually going to cheat and look. I'm a member of our Faith and Inclusion Disability Awareness Team. The name of that has changed several times, so I lose track. But anyway, so I've just been involved in all of these conversations, and so I'm just here because I'm a member of that group, and I've been involved in those discussions, and I'm just sharing some of the things that we've talked about.
Well, I don't have any kind of work experience with disabilities or anything like that. Mine is fairly recent, and a lot of it is basically through my family. I first became aware of a lot of disabilities just when I have, I have 5 family members. 2 of them are diagnosed bipolar. 2 of us, myself included, are Asperger's autism spectrum, and 1 is both. And so I become a lot more aware of what we call invisible disabilities, inclusion, and things like that. So I guess that's the reason I'm up here, is just to share some of my family experiences and things like that.
Thank you both. So Robin and David, in our shared efforts to make the church accessible to all, we want to use respectful, inclusive language, certainly involving persons with disabilities, but inclusive language seems to change so quickly that we're sometimes hesitant to speak at all. And for example, the word impaired, it used to be a term to be avoided, but now that term impaired is actually preferred by many people. So do you have thoughts or advice about the language that we use?
So 25 years after passing ADA, we have ramps and we have braille buttons on our elevators, but we still don't even know what to call each other. And so it's easy for us to get access, as Dan was saying, but actual real inclusion and interaction, we're still facing a lot of barriers just because we don't know how to approach each other sometimes. And so first off, I'll refer you back to the insert that's in your bulletin. Joe Hartsoe was kind enough to create this for us, and it has some really good information on the bottom half of the front part about using labels and people first language. Generally speaking, we try to use people first language always, whether it's about a disability or about any other defining characteristic of someone. And so that just means that we would refer to them as a person with a particular disability rather than as a disabled person. But there are some exceptions to that. For example, people on the autism spectrum may like to be called autistic or Aspies, which is short for Asperger's. People in the deaf community prefer to just use the term deaf rather than to use a longer label. One woman that I worked with, or that I encountered through work, said that calling her a person with autism was like calling her a person with femaleness. That it was such an important part of who she was that it didn't make any sense to create this cumbersome language around it. And she just felt like it was too central to her identity. Another issue is that labels are constantly changing. We are constantly deciding that what used to be acceptable is now pejorative and we can't say it anymore, or that we prefer to be called something else. And so we come up with all of these new labels in really rapid succession. So people first language in general is the way to start conversations, and it's a good general rule for what to follow. But then one of the most important things is to just listen to how people talk about themselves, how they self-identify. And then you can always ask them about their preferences, because ultimately you just want to respect the person's wishes rather than follow any particular rules, especially when you're talking about something that's such a big part of somebody's life.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the idea is, they're people first. It's like, we don't typically, we don't refer to my female transgender friend. We don't typically do a lot of that kind of thing. It's my friend who might have this particular characteristic or whatever. And so, again, it's people first. It's, and again, in a situation where we do want to, distinguish or whatever, it's, again, talking to them and getting their preference. Again, putting them first. So.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So David, you mentioned just a minute ago invisible disabilities. There's been a lot of talk about that lately. So, I mentioned it in the midweek message this week. It was pointed out that a majority of our congregation does not have visible disabilities. And do you have some suggestions about how we can be more mindful of the fact that many members and guests to our congregation may have needs that aren't readily apparent?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just kind of being sensitive to the needs. Like if somebody is, if you can see that somebody's needing, to kind of step aside for a moment, respecting that without necessarily drawing attention to it too. Because I think that's the big thing, is you want to be respectful of their needs without making a big deal about their needs. And so I feel like, in our Sunday school class, we both work with the youth Sunday school, and I think there's a lot of situations of invisible disabilities, and we try to accommodate that, like I said, without drawing attention. And so if somebody needs to step out for a few minutes, to take a break or something like that, then they can. And so that, I think that's the biggest thing, is being sensitive to those. Sensitive, if somebody's has sensitivity to colors or smells or something like that, or lights or something, they hopefully giving them an environment where they can feel comfortable in sharing that and talking about that. And the other thing too is just not necessarily, I don't expect to be looked at any differently or treated any differently coming out as an ASB on the spectrum, because well, part of my disability is the fact that I can kind of be ignorant about what's going on around me with those kinds of things anyway. But I don't not necessarily treating someone different because they've shared this particular need or this particular sensitivity or anything like that.
Thanks.
I would just add that, we're all dealing with a lot all the time, and we never know what somebody else is dealing with. Mm-hmm. And so, we're a really accepting community, but just remembering that, the person that you think of as a picky eater might actually have digestive issues or food allergies, and the person that you think of as being standoffish might have some social anxiety. And just thinking about what's causing some of those things, because we all have issues, and they all get worse when we're tired or stressed or grieving or anything like that. And so just allowing people to participate as much as they're able at the moment, and allowing them to withdraw and get away or get some kind of assistance when they need it, I think is the most important thing. Just doing what y'all naturally do, remembering that we're all dealing with something, and that including and loving everybody is the most important thing.
So good segue. We've got a lot of dietary restrictions in our congregation. We've got vegetarians, we have vegans, we've got lactose intolerance, gluten allergies. Linda Coates is a vegan who eats meat. I don't know what's going on there. Love you, Linda. Yeah. So given the fact, that was just my gesture of hospitality. Let that be a lesson. Given the fact that our faith makes us a people of the table, right? And so much of our fellowship is centered on sharing meals and breaking bread together, how do we simplify things when we're planning refreshments and bringing food to a potluck?
Okay. So first, huge thanks to Pam and Katie Engler and all the members of the fellowship committee, because they're working really hard to make sure that when we have sign-up sheets, that there are gluten-free spaces and vegan spaces and all of the issues that we're aware of, so that we'll have an array of food for those big events. And then when you're planning a smaller event like committee meetings or that kind of thing, of course the first thing is just ask who has dietary restrictions, and if you have any concerns that if they have concerns that you need to be aware of. Excuse me, I can't talk. But then also it can help to just avoid the big allergens like peanuts and that kind of thing, but then also to work with simpler whole foods instead of things that are really processed or really complex, because you have to be a scientist to know what's in a processed food sometimes. There's a lot of stuff that you can't recognize, and one casserole can have so many different ingredients that you can be setting off a number of different issues and eliminating a lot of people from that particular dish. And so just keeping simple foods, having roasted or baked meat as opposed to a casserole, having a salad with dressing on the side, having fruit as one of your options for dessert, those sorts of things. Because the simpler it is, the easier it is for everybody to know what they can have, what they need to avoid, and you don't have to have a million explanations. Everybody can just see what's there and know what works with their own diets.
Something this can kind of take it, from outside the walls of the church too. If you're in situations perhaps where there's food available or something like that. I'm involved a lot in a local theater group, and we always have food backstage and stuff like that. The producers provide some for the performers and whatnot, and if you're aware of certain dietary needs, sometimes cast members will bring stuff, and so, and one time I knew there were several people with, gluten-free eaters in our cast, and so I brought up something for that because I noticed that a lot of times most of the stuff that was there was definitely not gluten-free, lots of cookies and cakes and whatnot, and so taking it also even beyond the walls of the church, if you're in a setting and, being sensitive to that can also just open up opportunities to minister to people with dietary needs and stuff beyond the walls of the church too. Or like somebody brought brownies with peanuts and making a note that there's peanuts in this if it wasn't obvious. And so, and I did that one time, and somebody was very much appreciative of that because they were getting ready to have one. So just being aware of it beyond the walls of the church even too, we can reach out with that.
That sounds great. And as our congregation grows and becomes more diverse, planning truly inclusive events becomes more complex. And so beyond Sunday morning worship services and Wednesday evening faith formation services, how can we make our activities more welcoming for everyone?
Okay. So, I guess the big thing would be just what we saw in the video a lot too, is just being open, being accommodating. If you're going somewhere to eat after church or something like that, if somebody has dietary needs, ask them where they might want to go to. Do you have any other thoughts on that, or your?
Yeah. Way back when we were starting to talk about forming this awareness team, we had a really early meeting with just a few of us, and we went to a local coffee shop, and once we all got situated and fought to get to a table and everything, we looked around and went, wow, it's a good thing that nobody with physical disabilities is in our group today, because it was hard to get into the building. Once we got into the building, it was really crowded. The tables were really close together, and so if we had had walkers or wheelchairs or anything like that, it would have been very difficult to navigate the building. And then it was also really loud and it was crowded, and so if anyone had any hearing loss, it would have been problematic. If they had sensory issues, it would have been problematic. We're like, first meeting of the accessibility group, and we're just hit in the face with all the things that can go wrong with a location. And so just being aware of some of those things when you're planning outings or when you're planning the layout within the church. Dan mentioned in his midweek message, I think it was, about how we had accidentally set up for the barbecue in a way that limited access to the building. And so just being aware of the layout or of the location that you're going to. And then I think another thing is that all of us who have particular preferences or particular needs are aware that not everyone has those same preferences and needs. And so just creating a variety of opportunities where people can opt in and out of different activities, or having activities where multiple things are done. Like maybe you can't do all of a FA outing, but at least you can be there for the meal. Or maybe you can't eat what's at that restaurant, but you can go on the rest of the outing. And so you have other ways to participate around the particular parts of an activity that may not be perfectly suited to your needs. And so just having a variety of activities and a lot of opportunities, and just keeping those basic things in mind as you're planning them. I'm not sure that made sense, but there you go.
Thank you. Do you have any, as we wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts you want to share with us?
Something interesting, I was looking over the idea of, because again, I don't have a lot of experience just with the whole idea of disability accommodation and stuff, and so I was feeling a little inadequate, so I was doing some Google search, and I came across a PBS documentary transcript from a few years ago about the church and disabilities, and had this interesting quote on it. It said, people that you could think might have been disabled in terms of how they were depicted in the gospel, they're seen as mad or possessed by demons and so on, and Jesus cured them. He drove the demons out. There's a lot of stories in the Bible about Jesus driving out demons, and I grew up in the charismatic culture of the 1990s, which was, if you're familiar with Frank Peretti's books, This Present Darkness, Piercing the Darkness and stuff, and, the Touched by an Angel, the TV shows and stuff, where basically people were, seeing angels or demons behind every tree and rock and stuff. And, the idea of casting out demons from people is not a very practical thing for the church. Like I said, I went through that kind of that phase a little bit, but I got it. It was an interesting revelation, kind of, in that, the idea that, in those times, of course, a person with a disability, be it mental or physical, would have been seen as demon-possessed, and that the idea that of Jesus casting out the demon, not so much the idea that he heals the person of whatever it is, but he casts out the demonization of that he casts it out of the attitude of the people through his acceptance, through his inclusion, and that's something that we, the church, we can put that casting out of demons into practice. That we can, not demonize it or be so awkward about it by just accepting people as people, and, like the video shared, not being awkward around them, not overly drawing attention to them. And in doing that, I think we can model Jesus's casting out the demons through that idea of not so much, fixing them, but fixing ourselves, our own attitudes of demonization or whatever for people of mental, physical disabilities and such.
Thanks. Good. All right. Finally, before we have a closing prayer, I do want to ask that the members of the Faith, Inclusion, and Disabilities Awareness Team, if you wouldn't mind standing. You guys hear him? Great. Thank you. So I'm pointing out, stay standing for just a little bit. I wanted to point you all out to the congregation, put the spotlight on you for just a second, because we also want to encourage you that if you have concerns, questions, come to us. We might not have all the answers. But if we don't, we want to find them. And we want to be in conversation with you as we have been in conversation today, so that we can continue to have our attitudes changed and have this be about a good process. And so Carolyn, Elizabeth, Andrew, Joe, Pam, Robin, Diane, thank you all for being a part of the Faith, Inclusion, and Disabilities Awareness Team. And again, please come to us with your questions and concerns. So thanks. Let's have, thanks. Robin and David, thank you for your time with us and for being in conversation with us today. Let's pause just a moment, family of faith, and let's have a word of prayer together. Okay? Gracious God, thank you for continuing to open our eyes to how it is that we see one another, for in that illumination we come to see you all the clearer. In all these things we ask your continued blessings, your epiphanies, your education, and our openness to conversation, dialogue, and walking in your way always. We pray these things in your name. Amen.